in the house saw me, but they never opened the door. But when they saw I took some photo, they don't care about it. So this is the interesting part, I think. So if they care their backyard or care the space like a little private, a little public, I think they will go out and maybe say, oh, you can't, something like that. But they don't. So I don't know why. Maybe because I use a tripod and I use a big camera, it looks like not as safe. So I don't know.
Do you see these pictures as a reverse angle on the previous group of pictures?
It's hard to say.
What was the previous, sorry again, the previous group of pictures? What was
The last
pictures
group.
about?
You mean that part?
The pictures you made last time.
Oh, last time I took some photos about the grow in my houses and also in my classmates' house, because everyone told me it's not safe to take some photo outside at night. So I try to find some beauty in the houses. So I turn off all the lights and use a long exposure to catch some beauty thing inside.
I don't mean that as in a literal sense, but there is an interesting connection between the two bodies. So we're in the first group. They're taken from the inside, looking out at night, and these are like the opposite. Really, they're like shot into direct sunlight, looking back at the house through the garden.
Yeah, I'm thinking about I know because I can't say because maybe I have no car, I am not familiar with this place, so I had to. This limitation, I think, makes me to do some projects like this, and I'm glad to do something like to pay more attention to the environment or something close to me. I think it's very important because I used to be a journalist before, so I always observe other people's life and other things. So now I wanted to pay more attention to something close to me, and I think it's more important to me now, I think. And this semester, I try to keep my view as an outsider or as a foreigner. I think things change quickly. Maybe next semester, I'm a little familiar with New Haven, so I cannot find something like I saw. Something like that.
I've been here 25 years, I'm still an immigrant. And I think we will always have an outsider eye a little bit, maybe less or in a different way. But in a way, it allows you to maybe see more and not less. You don't have to be confident. You will anyway, but this, the gaze of an immigrant can be what your work is about.
Do you need to make a project in order to make a photograph?
No. I mean the project of
Do you have to create the parameters first in order to take a picture? Do you know what I mean? You decided that you were going to photograph backyards, so then you photograph 5 backyards, 10, 15, 20, 50, 30, however many backyards. And then before it was like you were going to photograph at night. So do you ever just make pictures without having parameters?
I think before I started to take photo, I observed many backyards because I pass by many backyards, and I think I don't want to take some photos like abandoned backyards and also like rich people's backyards. I just want to focus on common people's backyard. So I think I did a little research about from the Google Earth and the newspaper and think about the East Rock, maybe it's a part for the rich people, and and the center of downtown maybe for the poor people. So I think I try to take some photo for the just middle class or common people's backyards. Then I started to visit street by street, but just I think near my house, I think also near our school. Yeah.
I don't think you're understanding my question so much, which it's okay. I mean, I think you make these are really beautiful photographs on the wall, and there's kind of formal things that we could talk about that I think we will get to talk about, and questions about how the backyard is a site for American leisure, and how these are kind of anything but leisure. There's like really interesting things happening in the work. But I guess my first question for you is to think about how much the photographs need the umbrella of the concept in order to exist as artworks, and how much predetermined meaning there is, and how that you have a preconceived outcome before you even pick up the camera, and whether or not that's a generative way of continuing to work for you. It's just a question that you don't have to answer, but it's something maybe to think about. I don't know, do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think a little bit like sometimes I try to use some photos like taken by maybe some famous photographer like William Astor or something.
Yeah.
I use the same subject to map for something and try to answer. I think this is the question like also the Paul Strander's photo like the white fences, something like that. Because I'm not very familiar with American, so I read a lot of photo books, like the famous photographers took, and I also watch some famous movie. So like this thing is very, in my idea, it's very typical American thing. So I think maybe I can try to like.
Do you feel like you're a student of America right now?
No. Yeah. Yeah.
No or yes?
No. Now I think no. Because I still think about like. Yeah.
Well, one thing's for sure that the pictures are definitely channeling other photographers who approach very similar ground, sort of historically, and to me, that's part of what's interesting about it, but it's also maybe part of what makes them seem slightly less personal than the previous pictures. I mean, they're really beautiful to look at, but like it's almost impossible to look at these pictures without, I think, the long list of photographers from the 70s and 80s who all, in one way or another, approached like the backyard and the kind of intersections of neighborhoods in a kind of similarly detached, objective style. You mentioned Eggleston, but there are so many others in terms of particular kind of viewpoint.
It's a thing, I think, because when I did some research, just like Google backyard, American photography, there are a lot of articles and photos. And I'm thinking about like, because the first time I started to learn the backyard in that photo, it's an exhibition. It's the first time for me to understand the backyard, and there are a lot of advertisements and a magazine to encourage people to go outside, to build a swimming pool, to enjoy yourself. But once I arrived in New Haven, I saw the backyard like this. So I wanted to concentrate the different thing between the exhibition and the thing I saw. This is the first thing, I think.
And what did you understand about this specific place in America for the backyard?
Yeah, I think I'm thinking about like why these people don't pay attention to their backyards. because when I communicate with them, they said, "Oh, I have no time. I have to. My children's class is over. I should take my children, something like that." But I always ask myself, if I have a chance to rent a house or buy a house in America with a backyard, what I will do. I always ask myself, and I always ask my classmates, and they said maybe at first you wanted to pay some attention to the backyard, but life is so hard and something like that. Maybe you don't pay attention to them.
So actually, what I feel a little bit is that you didn't understand it. That not in a good way. You're like, I'm not understanding this backyard thing with Americans, and this is kind of a little bit what I'm feeling. It's like looking at something in a culture that is new to us and being like, what? Really?
Yeah, something like that. Yes. What? Yeah, this is the
Right.
first thing.
I guess I think it's hard to just rely on Google Street View to have an understanding of the complexity of the economics and
Yes.
the cultural, the political aspects of how neighborhoods form and how neighborhoods are differentiated. So I think that's one thing, and I think it might be also challenging to, because if you have the preface about backyards, because many of these pictures don't seem, they seem like some cross section between a habitat and some urban environment. So the residential and the urban environment, which is kind of what makes up New Haven. So I think I think if you were to continue with this work, I think that there needs to be some substantive research into the history of New Haven and even the formation of the different neighborhoods and the relationship of the university to the city. And I think even talking to these people, and I think maybe somehow incorporating that into the work. Because apart from that, yeah, I think they're very. They seem, on first glance, very well-made images. It seems like there's definitely some experience going into the composition and the description and all of that. It hits all those marks. But I think that for this work to really work and to function and to really say something about the subject matter, there needs to be real research and not just this kind of taking the outsider position, because you're here and there is information that you can obtain. And I think that you need to back this up with some research and some information, some understanding of it.
Or that maybe it's too easy to look at a 1950s idea of what leisure and what Americans are supposed to be doing, when in fact I think that and maybe sadly so, that these abandoned spaces that you're photographing, that the attention or the idea of how Americans identify as dad flipping burgers and the mom baking pies and the kids 2.1 and the white picket fence was never a sustainable dream, or in that it had a certain kind of oppressive ideology behind it that it's maybe not so sad that that 1950s idea of suburbia has been disbanded. 50s is kind of a rough period for America because what was the boomers, it was also the period before the civil rights or the women's movement, or it was so it's an interesting question about what that backyard was about and what the underbelly of suburbia was really about. I think about think Greg's work deals with that a little bit.
I found an article published in Artsy that 12 photographers did some good work about backyard.
If he was going to do it, right?
Yeah, I
There's actually, and I don't really, there's a whole sort of, as I said, these pictures seem in debt to a kind of backyard formalism of 1970s work. There's an endless list. I'm sure you might have seen a book called New Color that was like from that time. Like Stephen Shore and Roy Eggleston and Stephen Shear and Roger Merkin and Joanne Walters. There's many, many, many artists who are sort of looking at these kind of environments as a kind of a formal expression of like light and shape. And I mean, they're not without their qualities in terms of observation and description, but it feels slightly borrowed in a certain way. And I felt like the last group of pictures didn't feel that way. They felt much more subjective, much more particular, more coming from a more personal place.
Justine asked you earlier this question about projects. And I want to kind of say it a little differently. What I know from your work, it has previously been concerned with landscape, place, the built environment, the natural world, the relationship with geology. You know, it's really about like the look. Your ambition has been often to take a photograph which describes several realities coexisting. I don't know. I can't editorialize that project you did about that particular place in China. But I will say that it's clear from looking at the work that this is a place, a very specific place. And we look at it in terms of the built environment, weather plays a role in it. And these things are all coexisting across pictures and often simultaneously within pictures. And so I feel that the one thing that you're continuing here is to kind of pose this question, or to examine this issue of how do you show multiple realities, physical realities coexisting in a picture. And I do think that is often at the core of a lot of landscape projects. And in a way, I don't think this is a project. I don't really think the last thing you did was a project. I do think, just by watching you work, that part of your process is you respond to something. And your first response, the first time you said backyard, the first time you saw the light coming in through your window, this was you responding to something visually. And then you keep doing it. You keep doing it because you want to learn something about, you know, all the different ways maybe you can do it, or, you know, just what. I really think that this is process. You choose a subject, you keep on photographing it, because in a way it gives you permission to get up in the morning and you know what you're going to do. You're going to go photograph a backyard. That could be really productive, but I don't think that you should think of this too much as a project. It could very well be that your process yields one interior. The eventual inevitable role of editing and sequencing and deciding what the hell we've been doing for the last 2 years or whatever the final form can often be very surprising. So all I'm saying is, I think that this is part of the way you work. You do choose something that has a certain definition to it, and you return to it. The place in China had a lot of different corners to it, and this is a kind of subject which allows you to kind of chart this path across the haven. But that said, I actually think there's something you're presenting on the wall, and it feels so conscious, but Do you think that there's any real difference between the first 5 pictures and the last 4 pictures? Do you think is there a reason that you hung it this way? I'm just talking about the pictures themselves and what they say and how they say it.
I think like this photo or like this photo,
Yeah.
I never found the same thing like in China and something. This is the first time I saw them, and very.
Right. Yeah, these objects,
Yeah.
these particular objects. Yeah.
And
And then these, what can you tell me about these 4? Yeah.
It's not a test.
like the last one,
Did you say that was the first one, the last one, the first picture you made?
the first? I didn't show my first one. That one is I just use a cross and that for something in the ending,
Uh-huh.
at the ending, and I just saw something like the subject itself.
The subject itself?
Yeah,
Like the strand fence.
and the environment. Okay.
I think what just strikes me is, it seems to me that these 5 pictures have these events, these objects, the backyard, the space is a stage, and there is a character on that stage. They're really kind of inventions within the backyard. And in that respect, they feel a little bit more like art, like right away. These pictures feel that they're an idea that kind of crystallized, and it kind of, I don't know, they have stars and backdrops, and then these are very complicated pictures in terms of deciding what exactly the subject is. And this, I really feel, is an aspect of your vision that comes from experience, which allows you to organize space into sequences of events, but a kind of picture that one can end. And it's not just because they're deep space. There's a real kind of visual questioning about things that are useful, things that are being used, things that are not being touched, things that once were one way. It's almost like there's an archaeology to these pictures, or like a kind of geological record. And it is a form of visual, it's not storytelling, it's a kind of visual challenge to the viewer to kind of involve themselves in the kind of mystery of things that are not being described as mysterious. I think your choice of cloudless days and high noon, like that, the choice of light is very, very consistent. And I actually think it means something. It says there's no atmosphere here. There's no romance. This is kind of broad daylight, and there's just something very special about these 4. And I think that they're not easy pictures to digest, and I don't think they were easy to make. And I think they contain surprise and all-over composition, and then a real surprise in terms of just the navigating of these things, from the shadow of that vine, the kind of pristine, monolithic quality of that wall, which is, what is it even doing? What's it covering? I don't really understand what that is, but it's rendered mysterious. And then there's just the beauty of that thing coming into the light out of the shadows. This arrangement of, the flattened rectangle in the left, all these things are familiar, and yes, they have been subjects of, famous bodies of work, but I don't know. These pictures are complicated. They are of backyards, but that's not all they are. These feel like a simple melody, and these feel like a dense piece of music, which is challenging, but I'm still listening to it. And those over there feel like they're over there for a reason, because they share a certain quality. This is real. These are all puzzles. I mean, these are real. This is real kind of play, the flattening of the car, that James Turrell like flattening of something on the other side, and these are much more of a kind of slapstick world, and they're surprising because of that. So I don't know. I feel like somehow you knew this. There's a reason that these are all together. They flow together. They have something in common. I'm displaying a prejudice for these. I think that they're close to your heart. That's my interpretation. And I think they were harder to make.
Yeah. As you said, I really think about like because of limitation, like I wanted to observe like New Haven as an example for me to observe New Haven more carefully. Like I don't think I'm doing some project. I think I just wanted to take some photos about New Haven and every angles, and use photography language to help me to understand or build my visual language through take some photos in New Haven. So maybe I will do a lot of story about New Haven. Like, yeah.
Or not.
Oh, yeah, well, not.
You know, like
yeah,
Stephen Shore gives an assignment to his view camera students to go and photograph an intersection. It's a rite of passage. But his thinking behind it cuts to the core of a real photographic issue. His point of that assignment is that an intersection is an analytic problem. It's a visual problem. When you talk about visual language, his point is you have to figure that out. You've got to decide how to describe the givens of the things that aren't going anywhere, the architecture, the telephone poles, and then you got to deal with all the decisive moments, all the vagaries of things passing, and deciding what is a moment. What does it mean to stop time in a static place? What things are in motion, not to be repeated? What things are there and not going anywhere? What's the role of light in all of this? So it's an exercise in understanding that in a certain aspect, photography is an analytic medium where you're literally, there's cultural fluency and there's understanding what things mean. But then there's also like, how do I deal with space? And I feel like that to me, the visual language part is what I'm interested in. How you arrive at these things, that's up to you. But I do think at a certain point, I'd like that you look at these pictures and see certain ones as just as satisfying photographs, satisfying visual experiences, and others as maybe a little easier. Just a little less, that some things are capable of more surprise than others. And maybe the backyard helps in that respect.
The pictures seem to lack a certain kind of authorship, let's say. And these seem to be pictures about pictures, and they're kind of conducted as a kind of research project. And if you're going to continue exploring this subject from your own particular vantage point, I think you need to find a language that feels more like yours and less like other photographers. I think John's points are accurate in terms of the form of the picture, but I don't think that really solves the bigger problem. The bigger problem is one of what makes these pictures yours and no others. And they're less discovering America than they are discovering American photographs, which is interesting to a certain extent. It only gets you so far. And I do think that Arthur's point about I think what you were saying is trying to find more of an investment in the work in terms of whether that's through research or through kind of an emotional connection. One thing I do admire very much is you have an extraordinary work ethic that is amazing to see. The way you continually push out pictures, and I think that will help solve the larger problem.
Yeah.
Which is the problem of where you are in terms of these pictures.
To go back to what you started asking, and I don't know if you answered, but I think it's a critical question, and maybe one way to try and work is to be without a project. To just go out there and not think I have to complete this and make work about this, but just to let yourself which I think the work ethic is good, but maybe that's also what limits the work. To let yourself do work about nothing specific, just about what you want, and do a lot of work, not saying do nothing. You just search for let the work speak to you. The work just be alive and about nothing specific. Be without a project. It might be a scary place to be, but it might be something to try, at least for a few weeks.
The sweetest thing about the last group of pictures was the story about being with Mickey. Maybe you need to bring Mickey around with you when you do pictures.
Or maybe even Mickey's dad.
They could have a little tree out and take a cross-country road trip.
Oh, there's a Netflix series.
So,
Wrong way. Did you want to photograph any of the house owners?
I took some photo portraits for the house owner and some children, not the owner. Yeah, but I don't show them. Because I didn't think I took them very well. So just think about.
Are you interested in the families that you met?
To be honest, no. I don't want to take a portrait for the house owner. It's not that I'm
No,
interested.
for yourself though. Or do you not see it fitting in?
It's a little different, I think.
so I don't know what it's like to be a foreigner and like want to make work about the place in which I find myself in. But considering like what the work looks like and what you said about the work, I feel like perhaps maybe you just take a step back and realize that you're not only a foreigner here. Like you're just by being able to like speak in this room and have like the voice that you have and just be a Yaley is like actually a lot more like cultural capital than like people, than like the people who live in the spaces that you're taking photographs of. So I'm like wondering, considering that, like who are these photographs for, and like what are you extracting from these spaces, and like how does that deal with like power dynamics? And that's something. I guess I'm just generally interested in cultural fluency, and I know like perhaps it's okay also to just explore and like. And I'm not saying this is bad work, and I don't necessarily want to demonize you for actually doing this, but I think like I just wonder what stakes do you have in the like what you're photographing, or is it just superficial? Is it just like what it looks like, and
I'm also kind of wondering, like, do you know, of all these backyards, how many homeowners actually live in the space that you're photographing? Because I know from around New Haven, so many of these houses around here are owned by Pike International, Mandy Management, and they're kind of these houses that are just being rotated with people, with people that have no stakes in the upkeep. They're young college students living for a year at a time. And so I think like the idea that the homeowners are letting like their precious backyard just deteriorate might be much more complex than that. It could be what is a monopoly of kind of housing real estate moguls or something in the city itself. And so I think it's just kind of important to note, like, if you are speaking about homeowners and backyards, to make sure that the backyards that you're taking have these homeowners living there primarily, and they're not just rented out. Specifically for the ones when you don't talk to the people and you just show up and start taking, because for all you know, like the homeowner doesn't live there. The homeowner could treat that house like a charm on a charm bracelet, with no kind of investment at all. And I think that's kind of important to think about.
It's a really good point. There's a really important body of work by Hans Hocke that photographed these buildings in Manhattan and then gives all the statistics about the landlords. What is that called? Do you think the name of that? It's like a series. It's easy to find.
It's at the museum now.
Oh, yeah.
can I offer some film references? So I was taking notes during your statement, and when you were talking about the fence, it made me immediately think of Norman Clarence's Neighbors from the 50s. It's actually Canadian, but it's an anti-war film, and it starts off with these two neighbors in this animation. At first they're friends, the flowers are growing together, and then they end up fighting to the death. It also made me, when you were talking about this idea of the American dream and having a garden and how important that is to Americans, but fall short in what you found for your images, and maybe think of Grey Gardens, the documentary. So Edie and Lily Bouvier, who are first cousins with Jackie Onassis, Jackie Kennedy, and they're living this fanciful life in their minds in their crazy decrepit mansion. Which I think is actually northeast. And a Chinese film from this year, Ashes Pure as White, which is about central China, which is rarely documented in films and shown in the United States. But it also made me think about like what if he brought in a more personal narrative, because this storyline is about this couple whose relationship is becoming complicated while over the span of 10 years while the gorgeous dam is being flooded. So juxtaposing narrative against the changing landscape. I can go on to that.
Anyone else?
I think I like shudder when I hear American Dream because that's not like thinking about the American dream now. I don't even know what that means, you know. And I like to think of like apple pie is not the first thing I think of when I think of America right now. So I'm wondering like what you can do, like what your relationship is with this place, like how it can go deeper beyond like the surface cliches. Like I'm wondering, would you ever incorporate your window pictures like with some of these pictures, like in your mind, like can they live together even? Like what it would what it would look like? Like are you curious about like what it would do, or is it like really about these backyard spaces? Or I'm just curious about how you think about pictures.
I think when I took some photos, is I observed the scene and took the photos first, and then I started to find a story to tell. So this maybe it's wrong, maybe I think, but I don't know.
Nothing's wrong.
It's art, nothing is wrong.
Yeah.
But what about that, Dawn's question?
You mean the window?
If we took, say, one of your interiors and say one of these pictures, put those on the wall, could those be two pictures in a body of work which is not about one thing? Could you imagine representing your work as taking place in different venues?
I think it's a really generative generative thing to try to see what would happen if you put the best of what the pictures that still are meaningful for you from the last critique and the ones from this critique together, and see what those two pictures together would suggest what they needed next, you know? So it's not like backyard, but like backyard, nighttime, and then question mark.
I also try to take a photos from my house window, and the window outside is my house's backyard. But there's some technology problem. The focus point I can't control. Because I wanted to keep all the things clear, so it's a little hard for me now. But I try to take some photo like John said before. But I should solve several technology problems.
Or maybe not. Maybe you have less control, have some more technological problems in your work, and mess it up and loosen it up a little.
I'm thinking a lot about like my first critique, my first semester at Yale, coming from a journalism background. So I resonate with the questioning that Eleanor and Justine saying, words of like research and parameters. And that's something that I struggled a lot with my first year, and trying to like unlearn certain behaviors and what happens when we don't follow these certain rules of how we go about telling the story. So like, what happened when we abandon these rules and just shake things up. Something that I definitely grappled with my first year. So I'm saying I resonate, I feel you right now, and I'm feeling these questions. I'm looking at myself right now, like, oh, honey, it's okay. So I just want to say that, I get the need to want to tell a story and want to find a story, and then going out to search for that. But knowing that it's okay to like, doesn't need to make sense, it doesn't need to match, it can be whatever. Giving yourself, as the panel said in my grid, license to make the image. You give yourself permission in that way to do that. So exploring that is something that you might want to think about. So that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you.
I was just going to say something. I also know that when we first got here, like you had talked about wanting to make portraits, wanting to work with people, and I think there's something about the control maybe that you can't have, and having to interact with people that could be challenging but also helpful. And I know you said that you had made some portraits. I guess, yeah, I'd love to, like, I don't know. And you said it did not work in your mind, or I don't know. I guess that's just something I would love to see. Yeah. Personally, yeah.
I just think maybe not every photo needs 15 versions of them for you, and it's all kind of like what we're talking about. Like, I want to see a train, a backyard, like an indoor escape, a mall, a hot dog, whatever. Like put them all together.
There's
like,
a list of, for the WPA, there'd be like a shooting list.
Yeah.
Or maybe things like every week, if you want to work in a systematic way, you give yourself like the subject of the week, but then you mix them all up in the edit after a few months of shooting a theme every week.
Sorry, I interrupted you. I'm just letting those ideas and themes get you to the door, and then allowing whatever happens, and going in that direction too. Nothing's wrong with having these themes and these subjects to get you to the place, but then what happens after is all up to you, and just like allowing that to happen and photographing.
There's a difference between commentary, work that's like your commentary on something, work that's about something, and then this other thing, which is bound up with ideas about how things look, how they might look in a photograph, which is deeply intellectual work. In fact, it has to start there. It has to start with how things might look. And on the other, in contrast to commentary, there's work that actually generates conversations between pictures and within frames. It's like inviting these different characters to the table and letting them talk amongst themselves. I really think that that's how scale works. That's what it means to have a subject, but to complicate it. It's not a one-way thing. It's not just example A, example B, look at this kind of funny thing happening. This is your subject, and I can't say it strongly enough. These 4 pictures are of such a completely different order, and I actually think they're closer to what you're experiencing, which is things that you recognize, things that you don't, but everything rendered clearly and in a kind of ensemble. There's no one thing that matters more than anything else, and that's very powerful in terms of your addressing this narrow subject.
Sean, I couldn't help but thinking the previous work you've been making in China, the so-called Chinese train work, and I would really, I'm very curious what you think the West media, when they were writing about your work, how much you think it was accurate, how much you think it was like false reading, but taking that skill back to like change the perspective while you were making this work? Because according to Mickey, I almost forgot that a lot of houses are not living with the homeowner, because there's things that for us as foreigners could easily miss. I would still look back to the work you made in China.
Yeah, this is very interesting. When we went to the karaoke last time, so I think there are several songs in China are very popular. I mean, Western songs. But I asked my class, they never heard them before. So I wanted to sing some. I think I'm good at some English song, but they never heard it before. What happened? So this is the thing. I'm thinking about this. Some misunderstanding, and then
Like what song? On your end off by.
Like,
Say one.
Because when I was a child, I listened to a song "Yesterday Once More." It's very popular in China. I'm not sure whether you heard it before.
How many people heard that song?
There's many Chinese do.
Adding to what you just described, I think it's very
Why
interesting.
when young listen to the radio, waiting for my favorite song. You like that? Because I listen to this song in the TV station every day in China. But none of my classmates heard it before.
All right, we got it. We'll end it there.
Thank you.
Hey
Must see first smell.
Yeah, I love Elizabeth.
Yeah.
So anything she did.
Suggesting Twin Peaks.
I've seen all of that. Yeah.
But the light
We could talk more.
Yeah.
That was tough. You seemed so miserable.
I was because
You seemed so miserable.
it's so hard when you don't like the work. Like how do you know?
It's like, I just want to be anywhere else but there.
Yeah.
That's what I think about that.